Howdy, folks. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am your host, the Mighty Bjorn, and today for you, folks, going to be taking some time doing a new Warhammer 40k Wrath and Glory video, and that is because I won't be talking about Catachan jungle fighters, but I hope you guys have yourself strapped in because this is going to take a bit of time, going to be taking time to fully discuss, or at least mostly discuss, the demon invasion of Catachan. But the first thing I have to do is take some time and set the stage for you folks. And I'm doing this for people who aren't really familiar with everything or familiar with Warhammer 40k lore, and to maybe try to piece together how we can use this to influence our Warhammer 40k Wrath and Glory campaigns. So now let's first get into setting the stage. First thing to discuss is Catachan itself. Well, Catachan is a jungle death world within the Warhammer 40k setting. That's what it's categorized as. To kind of give you a good description, it's what happens when you take Australia, put it in Vietnam, and turn everybody into a Rambo. And then the demon invasion itself would actually happen after the 13th Black Crusade, where basically a great rift would open and pretty much cut the galaxy in half with warp storms, which are generally dangerous, very difficult to navigate. And this would also happen also towards the beginning of the Indominus Crusade, which was it is currently still going on within the setting of Warhammer 40k. But the Indominus Crusade is essentially the Imperium's attempt to essentially retake back lost territory, lost systems, if you will, that they have actually suffered over the last several millennium. And many Imperial forces, refugees, and etc. would actually come to Catachan itself, trying to use it for a staging ground for the upcoming Indominus Crusade. Basically, the news of the Indominus Crusade was out. Regiments was actually trying to muster up troops, including the Catachans themselves were also trying to muster troops to partake in the Indominus Crusade. Now, one set group of refugees would actually be the Talosian Grey Companions. Now, the Catachans themselves would actually do various things to try and figure out, could any of these refugees actually land planet-side, if you will. And basically, the only group of refugees that would actually be allowed to land planet-side because of how tough life is on Catachan itself would actually be the Talosian Grey Companions. And the Talosian Grey Companions would actually be assigned to Fort Tragan, and a small group of Catachan jungle fighters would actually essentially watch over them, make sure they're doing okay, things of that nature. However, what was unknown to the Catachan jungle fighters is actually the Talosian Grey Companions actually have joined the forces of chaos, actually even summoning demons on their own world. So essentially their world is now a chaos demon invested hellhole. So pretty much without warning, the first shots would be fired between the small group of Catachans that was watching over the Talosian Grey Companions and the Talosians themselves. The fight would be pretty brutal. It wouldn't be an extremely long battle. Understand that there really wasn't that many Catachans there, and they were actually overwhelmed by the enemy forces that was involved in the fighting. And of course, because of the fighting, the Talosians actually summoned demon forces of Khorne to invade the planet. They essentially opened up a webway. However, Colonel Ironhands Stryken quickly mustered his forces together, got a radio message out there, got everybody together, and essentially at this point you can cue Welcome to the Jungle. See, Colonel Ironhand would actually take and muster his forces together and launch a guerrilla campaign against the enemy Chaos forces. Now, at first, it didn't turn out very well for the Tolosians. Actually, they got wiped out pretty quickly. However, Khorne's demons were a little bit more resilient and decided to stick around quite a bit longer. So, this would involve an even deeper, longer campaign. Everything from tripwires to traps, landmines, and ambushes would be used against the demonic forces, and essentially, even the jungle itself would fight against the demonic forces of Khorne. Yeah, that's what happens when you invade a death world like Catachan. So basically, it turns out that the Catachan jungle fighters basically made the demons of Khorne pay for every square inch of the world that they took, which, like I said a bit ago, it really didn't last too long. The campaign was actually relatively short for for Khorne's forces, basically between the planet itself going against them, the wildlife, the Catachan jungle fighters, dealing with ambushes, traps, and everything else. They kind of decided to withdraw, which is kind of surprising how that turned out. They're actually apparently one of the very few Imperial Guard armies that could fight against the demonic hordes and actually fend them off. However, with that being said, this isn't the first time Catachan's been invaded by a very resilient force. So, all in all, at the end of the day, the Catachans themselves, they fought really hard. Yes, they did suffer some pretty heavy casualties during the short campaign, but by the time reinforcements had arrived, basically everything on Catachan was pretty much back to normal. There was actually pretty much no evidence at all that there was a demonic invasion in the first place. Now, with that being said, we could use this as a campaign for Warhammer 40k Wrath and Glory, and I think it'd be really interesting to do. The first thing I would argue you're probably going to need is Demons and Heretics, just because its guide has a bit more in the way of cultists, it has a bit more in the way of demons to work with, especially within the realm of Khorne demons, such as Bloodletters, and then, of course, Fleshhounds. But then there's also a nice little fan supplement I found on the Doctors of Doom website titled Astra Militarum, and it's by Engineering Devil. And essentially, it adds new archetypes, if you will, for doing Imperial Guard regiments. So I think to me, it's pretty much required if you want to do an Imperial Guard based campaign because it gives you additional options, additional archetypes to play with that your characters can create. And it fills out various different roles. And it's actually not a very heavy fan supplement, if you will. And the bonus part is you can grab it for free on the Doctors of Doom website. And if you want my personal opinion, I would have my players actually play as Catachan jungle fighters themselves, just because it gives the Astra Militarum supplement for Warhammer 40k Wrath and Glory, kind of gives you more archetypes to play with, so they could play as various different members of the Catachan jungle fighters. And hey, if a player gets killed, well, there's hundreds of more Catachan jungle fighters on the planet itself. Now, one thing the campaign should definitely feature is the heavy use of traps. Everything from claymore mines to tripwires, whatever. Well, not necessarily claymore mines now that I think about it, but some type of anti-infantry mine, maybe even some anti-tank mines, as well as just using remote explosives, tripwires, punji spike pits, the whole 9 yards. Pretty much one of those things, if it was used in Vietnam, your Catachan jungle fighters should be using it for their campaign. Now, you might have to do some house rules too, but the jungle itself should be deadly to both your players and the demon hordes. Like I said, it might be something you're going to have to house rule. I haven't really found any specific rules that would be great for this. However, Purge the Swarm has a few different rules in it that you might find useful for doing a deadly jungle campaign. Either way, at the end of the day, it's like bringing Vietnam to Warhammer 40k. Anyway, folks, hopefully you all enjoyed this video. Actually didn't go quite as long as I thought it would. But anyway, thanks again for tuning in, and have yourselves a wonderful day.